All right, who is the wise guy here? Nintendo console names. All of their consoles have them, even if it doesn't seem real. This is a bit of an out there topic, you know, just going through all of the Nintendo consoles and discussing what's in their name. I don't have any insider info or really much of an insight other than what I think of each name or why I think they chose each name outside of like the facts I already know. Like, why did they pick the name Wii U? Because they looked at themselves in the mirror and thought, we need to humble ourselves a bit. Let's go over all of the Nintendo console names and just discuss what each of them really mean to me, I guess. You know, if I like the name, if I don't like the name, and we're obviously off to a rip-roaring start right here. Game & Watch. Yup. The Game & Watch name is pretty iconic when it comes to Nintendo history at this point. That doesn't make it an amazing name. It is quite literally like the bare minimum of what this name needs to be. It's almost like so uncreative, it almost makes it creative. Game & Watch. It is game, it is watch. Honestly, the watch aspect of the Game & Watch units is almost always like the least important thing, yet it takes up a third of this line's name. It's so iconic, I can't help but like it, but I'm kind of lying to myself if I'm gonna go like, oh yeah, that's a great name, that's a creative name. It's nothing like that, man. I'd say looking at the names of Nintendo's pre-NES video game endeavors, the Color TV Game 6 is a better name. Thankfully, after the pre-NES era, we got the straight-up era. The Nintendo Entertainment System, NES, or in Japan, we got the Family Computer, or the Famicom. Both somewhat unsexy names right here. At the time, it feels like, you know, they were really trying to push these as very advanced tech systems here. Nintendo Entertainment System obviously feels a little more like, you know, hey, it's trying to be like a VCR or something, I guess. And Family Computer Famicom, it's just straight up saying like, oh, we're a computer for the home, for all the family to enjoy. The full name Family Computer, kinda lame, but the abbreviation Famicom, I actually think, you know, hey, that's something special. It's a name that does stand for something, even if it stands for something kind of boring. But, you know, hey, it is its very own, like, word there. I think it's a very iconic and catchy word for Nintendo's Japanese NES, the Famicom. Nintendo Entertainment System, I mean, like, hey, I can't hate on the name too much because, hey, it really put Nintendo on the map. I mean, it created a whole generation of parents or people in general that would refer to every video game thing as a Nintendo. So much so that even at the time, Nintendo pushed retailers to say, like, hey, like, don't call the NES a Nintendo. It does make me think, you know, back in the day, how many people genuinely called this by its full name? Were people really saying like, hey, I got the Nintendo Entertainment System. Hey, I got the NES. Obviously people did, but you know, I think the popular thing to just call the NES back in the day was Nintendo. It's kind of like how back then, these things were popularly called tapes, not cartridges. But hey, this name was obviously a response to the video game crash of 1983, where a lot of retailers just didn't even want to stock anything that even smelled like a video game. So, you know, the whole history rigmarole of Nintendo introducing Rob to make it seem like this console wasn't a video game system, it was a toy. And I think calling it Nintendo Entertainment System definitely kind of put it more in line with like, oh, it's, you know, it is an entertainment system, it's not a video game system. Because throughout the development of bringing the Famicom over to North America, Nintendo definitely tested a couple of names, and they actually showed it off at some trade shows under names like Nintendo Advanced Video System. But you know, what they settled on, it works. And you know, the acronym NES, it's just kind of ingrained in vocabulary. Like it just sounds natural at this point. There has been some controversy whether or not it's pronounced, you know, NES, like every single letter is just stated there, or if it's NES. I mean, NES from Earthbound is obviously a reference to that pronunciation. And then also there was WarioWare Gold on the 3DS. There was a part where, you know, you could kind of collect different Nintendo consoles, and they would show like a little description, and the NES description said like, oh, it's pronounced NES. Now I saw like a bunch of articles pop up once this was discovered in that game, kind of going like, oh my god, Nintendo actually confirmed that it's pronounced NES? which, like, no, I'm just gonna throw it out there. WarioWare is a cheeky bastard. I think they were just screwing around because Nintendo has constantly, and I'm saying constantly, referred to it as NES. So that's kind of a weird hill to die on in WarioWare Gold. It's also a weird hill to die on for them to say, oh, don't call the NES a Nintendo, when the damn controller just says Nintendo on it. God damn, I'm getting mixed signals all over the place. Well, how about its follow-up, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System? I don't think I can't remember the last time I've actually heard somebody refer to it by its full name. It's always either just Super Nintendo or it's SNES. There's no in between there. I mean, can you really blame anybody for just calling it Super Nintendo? I mean, it's just the most prominent thing on the logo. And similarly in Japan, it is just called the Super Famicom. Now, I believe that's just its full name. I mean, you see it right there, but I don't believe it's ever been referred to as Super Family Computer. I'm not 100% sure about that at all, but every source I see always refers to the Super Famicom as just the Super Famicom, whereas the original Famicom was the shortened name for the official name, which, you know, you can see on the full-blown box, it is Family Computer. Now, a lot of people are awfully nostalgic over this name. A lot of people consider this to be one of the best names, to the point where whenever there's a sequel to a Nintendo console, there is just this huge crowd of people that are constantly like, name it Super Blank. You know, oh, the Wii U should have been named the Super Wii. The Nintendo Switch 2 should have been called the Super Nintendo Switch. Okay, back then this works. Nowadays, I don't think it works that well. Nowadays, we have pro systems like, oh man, you know, the Xbox One X, the PlayStation 4 Pro, the PlayStation 5 Pro. Naming something Super Blank not only hasn't been done in ages when it comes to video game consoles, but, you know, like, I feel like it kind of has that stigma a little too much. You see something like Super Nintendo Switch, and what do you think? Do you really think that, oh, this is the sequel? But that's not to say there wasn't confusion back when the Super Nintendo released. I remember seeing, like, news videos online on YouTube, people posting how a lot of parents were not that thrilled with the Super Nintendo's release, kind of thinking it's just like, what's wrong with the Nintendo I already had? You know, like they were already kind of thinking about these things as just genuine toys. Oh, you know, hey, why do I need this Super Nintendo? What makes it so super? But the way people talk about it back then really does seem like they really hit it out of the park when it came to marketing towards kids. This was the hot shit. Oh my god, you have the Nintendo and then the Super Nintendo? It's a pretty powerful name. I don't really think it would work as well these days, but back then, I mean, damn, Super Nintendo. And just the fact that so many Nintendo games, specifically just, you know, Super Mario Brothers, has Super in the name, you know, it just feels right. It just feels iconic. It feels like Nintendo. Which is why afterwards, Nintendo had absolutely nowhere to go but just shoving random ass numbers in our face. Nintendo 64. Yeah, I mean, like, here's the thing. Nintendo 64, I feel like, is potentially one of the most iconic console names ever. And I think that's because, like, so many games for the console used 64 in their names. You know, you have Super Mario 64, Star Fox 64, Doom 64. Just all of these games have 64 in the name. Like, it's just like, just having that number in there, just so iconic for no goddamn reason other than they just shoved it down your throat. So whenever I hear the number 64, like, Nintendo, like, basically patented the number 64. You can't use that number without thinking Nintendo 64. And that is pretty badass when you take a step back and think about it. And also, like, kind of going with the logo. The logo very subtly is, like, the coolest thing ever when it comes to, like, correlating with the name. You know, you might have seen, like, the fun fact about how the Nintendo 64 logo in 3D has 64 vertices and 64 sides. That is such an awesome attention to detail for something, like, nobody would notice unless they see a fun fact about it online somewhere. With that being said, what the hell is this name? It is such a dumb name. It is such a boring name. This was during the bit wars, where all the console manufacturers are trying to brag about how many bits their console had, even though nobody knew what bits were. NES was 8-bit, SNES was 16-bit. Sega really kind of forced Nintendo's hand to really just talk bits so much, because when the Sega Genesis came out and was competing with the NES, they were like, oh, the Sega Genesis is 16 bits. The NES is only 8. And then that's how you get the Atari Jaguar going, oh, the Atari Jaguar is 64 bits. So, when Nintendo was putting out their new home console here, and, the PlayStation and Sega Saturns, those were only 32 bits. Well, you know what? Nintendo, 64 bits. But what it was originally meant to be called was the Nintendo Ultra 64. I believe they were also planning to call it in Japan Ultra Famicom. I guess they were just really trying to figure out, like, okay, where do we go after Super? So, they went Ultra, Ultra Nintendo. I feel like they dropped it because it's like, okay, the console after this, what the hell are you doing? The perfect Nintendo? No, it's just like, you gotta just start naming your stuff different things. It can't just be upping the ante each time. Unless you're just gonna do something like what PlayStation does, where, PlayStation 1, 2, 3, and 4. It was also probably just getting a little too wordy. Like, okay, you have Nintendo, Ultra, and 64. Ultra or 64, pick one or the other. Don't include both. So they decided to just go with Nintendo 64. Very iconic name, but it's pretty damn bad. I mean, you look at the competition at the time. The PlayStation, that's at least something, I guess. I mean, we're all so used to it now, but it's just kind of like, oh, really, the PlayStation? Ooh, okay. And Sega Saturn, that's something too, at the very least. Nintendo 64, Nintendo pretty much made you care about a number that means nothing to most people. But damn it, they did it. Incredibly iconic name, like, I love it for that reason. I don't love the name itself, really. I mean, like, what the hell do you want me to think about this thing? Well, for the N64's follow-up, I think Nintendo kind of wanted to take a little page out of the Game & Watch's book, and they named their system out of exactly what it is. It's a cube that plays games. I don't have much of a problem with the Nintendo GameCube's name. I think it's kind of cute. On top of that, the logo is just straight up genius. I mean, like, okay, it's a G that forms a cube that has a C in the middle that forms another cube. I just realized the A in GameCube is the same as the A in Game Boy Advance. They were definitely going for some synergy between those two consoles at the time. Which, thinking about it, I mean, like, calling this GameCube while the handheld line is Game Boy, is definitely pretty interesting. Were they trying to do something where it's like, oh, on the go, it's the Game Boy. At home, it's the GameCube. I don't really know, but I do find it pretty interesting that they named the console after how it looks. I can't think of a ton of consoles that are named like that. Xbox maybe, because, the original is shaped like an X, kinda. But, like, I kind of feel like, they came up with the name first, and then they were like, oh, yeah, wouldn't it be kind of cute if, it was kind of X-shaped? One thing I do not like about the GameCube is the official abbreviation for it. Which is not NGC. Nintendo made damn sure. They were like, don't call it that. The official abbreviation is GCN. Look at any retro Mario Kart tracks. Like in Mario Kart 8, if something's from Double Dash, it says GCN. And it always bothered me. Obviously, they have to call it that because, like, I think somebody else owns the abbreviation NGC. They don't want to get into legal trouble, so it's GCN. They also probably can't call it GC, so that's just how it is. I mean, hell, I would have taken like GCB or something. GCN is just like, it's not called the GameCube Nintendo. It's like how the PS1 is often abbreviated as the PSX, which I didn't understand. I had to look it up, where apparently the PlayStation 1's code name was originally the PSX. So a lot of news outlets referred to it as PSX, and they kept on referring to it as PSX. And I'm just like, that. I don't care. I always abbreviate it PS and then the number 1. But anyways, going back to the GameCube, I like the GameCube's name. I think it's cute. Definitely my favorite name so far. Nintendo so far has not been the greatest at console names. Well, hey, at least they're being consistent. The Wii. This one kind of stings a bit for many people, considering at E3 2005 they announced it as the Nintendo Revolution. I love that the logo incorporates the fact that it plays Nintendo Revolution games on like DVD-sized discs, but then also it's backwards compatible with GameCube games, so they show a smaller GameCube disc as another one of the O's. Wow, that is such a stupid feature to completely design your logo around. But yeah, a lot of people were pretty damn stoked about Nintendo Revolution. I think they revealed pretty much most of the major big boy things about, this console before they finally gave it its final name, Wii. E3 2005, they showed off the console itself. I believe at Tokyo Game Show a couple months later in 2005, they showed off the controller for the very first time. And, I think it was all still called Revolution at the time. But I think right before E3 2006, that's when Nintendo dropped this. We're all used to the Wii at this point, and hey, we're all adults here. There's nothing funny about this name anymore. But back then, oh boy, this name was a big decision in many ways. For one, I believe this is the very first Nintendo home console that does not have Nintendo in its official name. You can call the Wii the Nintendo Wii if you want to, but its official name is not Nintendo Wii. It is just Wii. And the fact they gave up such a badass name for literally this, a lot of people were very confused about that. Looking back, the Nintendo Revolution name, it's cool at the time, but it's very wordy. 4 damn syllables that Revolution word is. And at this point, the Wii name is so iconic, I think they made the right call here. Especially considering, the main thing with this console was bringing everybody together and introducing video games to people who, were never really video game players to begin with. And I think Nintendo's direction with the Wii is so damn amazing that they knew exactly what they had. They knew they could attract literally so many people with this console. And that's so rare to have a product that the company knows exactly what's gonna happen with it. They knew for a fact, hey, this console's for everybody, it's going to appeal to everybody. And it did. The fact that the Wii heavily emphasized local multiplayer, everybody coming together and playing together and sharing together. It's represented not only in the name, but just the logo, just the letters. The 2 eyes represent 2 different people. The name itself, Wii, when we're talking about it, we, we, us, it's about, togetherness. And I think their marketing perfectly represented that. I mean, when you go back to the E3 2006 trailer for the console, they show all these different letter I's and just jumping around, bouncing around together, playing together, really making it obvious that they represent people right here. And then in the iconic "We Would Like to Play" commercials, how they have the 2 guys show up to everybody's door, bow down saying "We would like to play." And then at the end of the commercial, and during most Wii commercials, they do show these 2 eyes bowing down. They made damn sure that you understood why it's called Wii. And I think they did an amazing job with this name. It is a silly name. I think that's the point. I mean, at E3 2006, Reggie made a joke about it on stage where he was like, "First of all, thank you all so much for everybody and their nice comments about our dumbass name." But that's just the thing. It's eye-catching and you remember it. You laugh about it at first, but, after, you're never gonna forget this console's name. I think that's the big thing. And the fact they then use this branding to, name their avatar creator software on the Wii and called it Mii's. There's so many layers to this. It's like Mario and Wario, how you just flip this shit upside down and then boom, there you go. It's a completely different thing. Because Wii is about everybody, but Mii is about specifically you. You gotta make yourself. It's easy to dog on this name, but I got a lot of respect for them to just do something very bold with the Wii's name. It takes a lot of guts to name your game system. after a penis. There, I said it. Well, that took guts. This is just flat out a humiliation fetish. Ugh. Okay, the Wii U. This is probably one of the biggest fumbles of a name in video game history. Here's the thing, and I've talked about this before, but you know, let me just humor me for a bit. The Wii U name in concept, I can 100% understand what they're going for here. The Wii was a tremendous success, and it was an unconventional name. It did its job. You could immediately tell what the hell it was. But with the Wii, Nintendo did all these different accessories and games, and they were all called Wii Blank, Wii Sports, Wii Music, Wii Fit Plus, Wii Balance Board, Wii Wheel, Wii Zapper, Wii Speak. I think it pretty much made it so then if you would name this console anything but Wii 2, it would have been confusing as to like what it was. But because Wii was an unconventional name, I don't think Nintendo wanted to call it Wii 2. Because, you know, Wii was a name that meant something. You know, it's something that Nintendo said, like, oh yeah, it has multiple meanings, but it really means, you know, hey, let's get everybody together. This is for all of us. But then with the next console, this is trying to appeal to everybody and then some. Yes, you get all the casual games, but you also get a lot of the hardcore stuff, you know, for you, the hardcore gamer. So, you know, it wanted to appeal to everybody, but also have a lot of games and a lot of experiences that spoke to a lot of individual people. So they kept with the idea and named it the Wii U. And, you know, the U is just with the letter U. You know, it makes sense as a follow-up name to the Wii. I will 100% say that. It makes sense in that regards. It is still a horrible, horrible name. It just shows, I mean, you can be as cutesy as you want, but, I mean, sometimes you just gotta be realistic. This, along with how Nintendo revealed the Wii U and how they barely showed off the console, how they mainly showed the gamepad, and a lot of the games they were showing off for the Wii U looked like just HD versions of Wii games, on top of the Wii brand already having just way too many products and games and accessories that are called something similar to this. And the Wii U, everything you see about the Wii U emphasizes this tablet controller. Like, yeah, everybody just kind of thought this was an accessory for the Wii. I've heard a couple of people say a good name suggestion would have been Wii 2, but 2 is spelled like T-O-O, and it's all lowercase or something. It would have been kind of a very baby-looking name, but hey, I think it would have been a lot more immediately understandable. The Wii U name is definitely bad, but I will give it credit. It obviously took a bit of time and a bit of creativity to come up with it. I think it makes sense from like Nintendo's perspective back then. The problem is Nintendo's perspective back then was dog shit. Well, hey, that brings us to the Nintendo Switch. I gotta say, like, first time I saw this name, it was such like it was such a weird thing where just seeing that word, Switch, it almost seemed like odd, you know? It's like the first time you see something like this, it's just like, wow, that's kind of an odd direction to go in, but hey, it worked. I wouldn't say this name is as creative as the Wii's, but I think it perfectly describes the unique attributes of this console, while also being just kind of like a catchy, understandable name, you know? Nintendo Switch, oh, you can switch the way you play, switch it up, switch the controllers out, all of that stuff. I think it's interesting they brought back the Nintendo name in the name of the console itself. The point that it's just like, it is not officially called the Switch. It is always Nintendo Switch. Well, you know, it's a very quick name to just call this thing. Oh yeah, did you bring your Switch? You know, like it's easy to just say Switch. And everybody knows what you're talking about. I think most of the uniqueness comes down to the logo here, how it does kind of look like, you know, like the yin yang, you know, like, oh, but it's the Joy-Con, and, you know, it shows exactly, you know, the unique thing about this console. I think after the Wii U, Nintendo really needed to make sure that this console's branding was completely different. It emphasized the fact that this is a new Nintendo console. It is a quick, sharp word that immediately describes what this console does. It switches. It switches from handheld to TV to tabletop. You switch the controllers out. It's the Nintendo Switch, damn it. That's all it is. That's what this console's name kind of feels like to me. It feels like it was specifically born out of the problems the Wii U had. But hey, it works. You can't deny that. So much so that, yeah, with the follow-up console, they weren't around. Nintendo Switch 2. The very first time Nintendo's ever done a numbered sequel to one of their video game consoles before. Just Nintendo Switch 2. A lot of people were talking about before the name was officially revealed, you know, the idea of like, what if it's not Nintendo Switch 2? There is some really dumb leak kind of thing where there was like a survey put out by like some firm that said, are you interested in a new game console? If so, which one? PS5, Xbox Series X, and Switch attach? So a lot of people were saying that, like, what if the Nintendo Switch's successor's name is the Switch Attach? No. Listen, as dumb as Nintendo can still be sometimes, I think the Nintendo Switch really got them kind of on, like, course to just, like, we're not screwing around here. It's literally just call it the Nintendo Switch 2. You can be as cutesy as you want with your games, but the console itself, no. Just say what it is. It's the Nintendo Switch successor. What else are you going to call it at that point? Just call it Switch 2. So yeah, as boring as it is, I have absolutely no problem with that name. Because, like, it is what it is. And honestly, going through Nintendo's past of console names, a lot of them aren't really anything that special. Many of them are downright horrible. But hey, might as well do a bit of a speed round with the handhelds. Because these, I mean, there's pretty much only like 3 major lines of Nintendo handhelds. You know, we have the Game Boy line here. The Game Boy name is pretty good. You know, I think it's definitely a much more creative name than the Nintendo Entertainment System was at the time. You know, and similarly, you know, as much as everybody called, you know, home video game consoles Nintendos at the time, people pretty much always called, like, portable game systems Game Boys. Of course, why is it called that? Well, the Walkman was pretty popular at the time, so you have a Walkman. Here's a Game Boy. Of course, video games at the time were primarily kind of like marketed towards like young boys. So I think they wanted to like express that via like, hey, this is the Game Boy. Even though Nintendo, even at the time, like they were specifically kind of like, hey, like let's appeal to everybody. That's why Tetris was packed in with the original Game Boy. I remember, I think it was like, hey, you know, they could have packed in Tetris or Super Mario Land, and they chose Tetris because it had wide appeal. And, you know, a lot of people will say that, like, oh yeah, my mom, my dad, my grandma, my grandpa, they were playing the Game Boy, and they were playing Tetris all the time. As a kid, I always thought, like, what if Nintendo would make, like, a Game Girl system? But, you know, I think Game Boy was just a name that stuck. It just got to the point that, like, you know, the Game Boy name was just like, that was just what Nintendo called their handhelds at the time. Even when both boys and girls, you know, had Game Boys, they played the hell out of Game Boys. I think that's probably why Nintendo eventually phased out the Game Boy line because, you know, especially during the Nintendo DS and Wii era, they were trying to appeal to everybody. And I think just maintaining the Game Boy name is just like, you know, why do that when you want to appeal to not only boys and girls, but also, you know, like adults too. Well, the Game Boy's follow-ups, Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance, I mean, you want to talk about boring-ass names. Game Boy Color. Feels like a lot of things back in the day, you know, like they really emphasized if they made the leap to color. I mean, like, you have Game Boy Color. I remember, like, the Video Now players, they had Video Now Color. And Game Boy Advance, I mean, that's something. I guess, yeah, it's the Game Boy, and we're moving forward, finally. The Nintendo DS feels like a damn project name, man. Like, it's just like... What? The name almost seems unfinished, but like, no, I mean, Nintendo knew what they were doing, I guess. Hey, at least it opened up the doors for the successor to be called the 3DS, which is really cute. That might be one of my favorite Nintendo console names, just because it's like, it is kind of cheesy, but it just feels like the weirdly perfect, like, follow-up, where it's just like, you already have DS. Well, this is the 3DS. We also have all of the variations of Nintendo consoles throughout the years. The multiple versions of the Wii. You have the Wii Family Edition, which is basically a Wii that is, you know, on its side and removes the GameCube compatibility. That name is pretty much that name pretty much just comes from like what like some of the bundles were called in like Europe, but it's just like there's nothing damn family about it. Maybe the fact that it's like it was cheaper than the Wii was originally, so it's just like, oh, it's great for families on a budget. There you go. Dumb. Then you also have the Wii Mini, which was like a fully redesigned Wii. But the Wii Mini is like, it's barely much smaller than the original Wii. It's served up differently. I don't think it looks smaller. So calling it Wii Mini, like, if it was the size of like a damn like Apple TV, like one of those like Roku TV pucks or something, that would be something. Yeah, by all means at that point, call it Wii Mini. I don't think it deserves the name Wii Mini. It's definitely pretty interesting what Nintendo kind of constitutes as like worthy of a certain subtitle. You know, like Wii Mini is mini. But then with the Game Boy line, you have the Game Boy Pocket, which I think is definitely like a fair name, but you know, I mean, the original Game Boy was still meant to fit in your pocket. Though, you know, I think that definitely caused many kids problems. But I think that does a fine enough job of like explaining like, yeah, this is a smaller, more portable friendly Game Boy. But then you have the Japan only model, the Game Boy Light. Okay, here's my problem here. Light could also mean, you know, lightweight, which is what pocket implies. No, light here means this model has a backlight. So that's something. I don't know what else you might have called this one. I just think, you know, they flat out probably should have just not even released the Game Boy Light, to be frank with you. I mean, it released so close to the Game Boy Color. They discontinued it so quickly after, because it's just like, it was, what are you going to buy? The Game Boy Color that plays all the new games, or Game Boy Light? That's just an old-ass Game Boy with kind of a cruddy backlight on it. But this is just kind of the weird thing, because Nintendo would then later use this name for other handhelds, but they would spell it in a completely different way. Nintendo DS Lite, L-I-T-E. This was kind of a popular word to use around this time. I remember when the iPhone App Store was hitting it big, you would usually find like a free version of many paid apps, and they would always be called light versions, spelled like this. This is kind of a trendy way to spell light, but this implies that like this is a kind of a slimmer, sleeker version of the Nintendo DS. It also has a brighter screen, so the light could also, you know, imply that. And they actually brought back this name with the Nintendo Switch Lite, which is meant to be like, hey, it's lighter, like it's smaller, but it's also lighter in terms of features because it can't connect to a TV. It doesn't come with a dock. Nintendo DSi, that one is pretty self-explanatory, and you know, including the whole camera setup there. You know, eye like an eyeball, but then also the fact that it has a heavier emphasis on internet connectivity, so the I could stand for that. Then Nintendo DSi XL. Guess what that is? Now, strangely, in Japan, the XL is referred to as LL. You know, I guess that's just how they refer to extra large over there. But then, holy f***, the 3DS line goes crazy. I mean, you have Nintendo 3DS and then 3DS XL. Okay, that's fair. Nintendo 2DS. That's cute. Of course, that name brings up a lot of weird problems because I almost feel like that name goes against a lot of rules, where it's like, it is a 3DS, but it's called a 2DS. So what is a 2DS? Isn't that just a normal DS at that point? No, it plays Nintendo 3DS games in 2D. Yeah, okay. I mean, like, yeah, what else are you gonna call it? It makes perfect sense as a name, but, you know, it almost feels like, it technically should go against Nintendo's rules, where I feel like they would tell themselves, like, a system that plays Nintendo 3DS games must be called Nintendo 3DS. Well, then we have the refined models, the new Nintendo 3DS and new Nintendo 3DS XL. Yeah, so they were really pushing the word new back then. I believe the word new in Japan isn't as confusing as it is over here. And I just heard that they like using the word new for Japanese products. I believe like the redesigned version of the original Famicom, the one that's like the top loader, that was also called the new Famicom. So I guess Nintendo had no problem with the name. Doesn't mean I don't. That's what everybody says. That name is so confusing because, of course, like, yeah, video games already are, like, so ingrained in our head for us to, like, be aware of, like, oh, new video games and used video games. Especially video game consoles. You know, everybody's gonna buy, like, a new video game console or a used video game console. So it's just, yeah, the idea of buying a used new 3DS. Yeah, it's pretty funny, isn't it? But then you have the worst Nintendo console name of all time, the new Nintendo 2DS XL. Need I say more? You have the Game Boy Advance SP, which I believe stands for special. That handheld is a lot more than just special. Like it's like a complete reinvention of the Game Boy line, the Game Boy Advance system. Like, why? Why is it called SP? I never really understood that. I think it's kind of like how it's weird how, like, you have, like, the iPhone SE, and I think SE there stands for Special Edition. I'm like, that's not special. It's an old-ass iPhone with new internals. And then Game Boy Micro. Yes, it is Micro, but the fact that it's called Game Boy and not Game Boy Advance Micro is a little strange because all it plays is Game Boy Advance games. It doesn't have backwards compatibility with any of the other Game Boy games, so just calling it Game Boy Micro, a little strange. We have the Virtual Boy! We sure do. And Nintendo Switch OLED model. That is like the most like depressing name Nintendo's ever done. Yeah, throughout it all, Nintendo is definitely all over the place when it comes to names. Some of their names are kind of fun. Some of their names are batshit insane, and a lot of their names are pretty damn boring. But even with kind of like weird names, it feels like Nintendo kind of can tell something is special. Like, why would they even call the DS just the DS? like why wouldn't they pick something that sounds a little more like immediately like cool? Instead, it's just Nintendo DS. But they knew it would work out very well. For some reason, it feels like Nintendo has a knack for picking out like two specific letters or something, or even just a number like 64 that, you know, like just becomes iconic there. But even with a name as boring as, say, Nintendo Switch 2, like, you have to admit, it makes sense. What, and this doesn't?